Hello everyone, I'm the Korea Cat, and you might know me from the Skyrim audio adventure series that I've got going on. And if that sentence wasn't gibberish to you, then I just outed myself as a massive nerd, which I am. I love fantasy, sci-fi, sci, non-fi, dinosaurs, anime, D&D, Pokemon, and nature documentaries. However, you might not know that I'm also a big-time sports nut. This duality came to a head in high school for me when I was at one point a county science fair winner, at one point the varsity quarterback, and at one point the lead in a school play. What can I say? Autism works in mysterious ways. Suffice it to say that I feel uniquely qualified to introduce the drama of the NFL playoffs to an uninformed and likely uninterested crowd. So, if you have friends or family who are football fans and you want to be able to bond with them or just understand their conversations, or perhaps you're just interested in becoming a fan and you are looking for a primer of sorts, or maybe in the end you just like to hear me yap, but either way, just stick around as I present a nerd's guide to the NFL playoffs. Now, I'm just going to give you a quick, basic rundown. I'm trying to keep this simple. Football is a game played on this field. It's 100 yards long, and this is the ball. At either end of these 100 yards, there's these big rectangles and also these big yellow fork things sticking up in the air. The goal of the game is to grab that ball and get into that rectangle with the ball. That's it. There's a lot of nuance to it, but that's football in its purest form. Get the ball in the box. When you do that, it's called a touchdown and everyone cheers. You score lots of points. Your parents are proud of you. Everything's good. You can also kick the ball up between that big yellow Y thing, and that's also good, but you get less points. So you really want to do the first thing, but yeah. Now, the NFL, or the National Football League, is the biggest football league in the world because most of the world doesn't call football football. They call football American football, and what they call football, we call soccer. It's very funny. If you haven't seen Ted Lasso, you should go watch it. It's a good time. Anyway, the NFL consists of 32 teams from 30 different cities. Those 32 teams are divided into two conferences of 16, the NFC and the AFC, which just stands for a National Football Conference and American Football Conference. It's all kind of weird and redundant. Sports is like that. Then they are further divided into loosely regionally based divisions, 4 divisions of 4 for each conference. There's the North, the South, the East, and the West. However, for some reason, Indianapolis wound up in the South, so I don't know how that works. Teams from those same conferences play each other more often on a year-to-year basis, and teams from the same division play each other every single year. So being from the same division, that's a big deal. Those are your rivals, the neighbors that you hate, your most familiar enemies, the Dinkelbergs of the world. Now, at the end of the year, the 14 best teams all clash in a big tournament called the playoffs. It's a single elimination tournament, so if you lose, that's it. You're done. Go home and, pet your cat. Your cat misses you. I know they don't act like it, but they do. The goal of the playoffs is to make money. The goal of the playoffs is to whittle down these 14 teams into the 2 that will face off in the climactic clash to determine the champion, the Superb Owl. It's called the Super Bowl, I bet. But look it up, Superb Owl. It's a very funny story. Okay, let's get to brass tacks. If they're on this board, then they did make the playoffs this year. And those are the ones that we're going to talk about today, starting with the Green Bay Packers. Based out of Green Bay, Wisconsin, the Packers are the old guard of the NFL. They won the first 2 Super Bowls ever played, and the Super Bowl trophy is actually named after their coach at the time, Vince Lombardi. They've enjoyed pretty consistent success over their history, but largely fell out of prominence after those first 2 landmark wins. That is, until the 1990s, when... Okay, look, I know that I was trying to keep this as simple as possible for, non-football fans, but I need to go on a bit of a tangent here. There are lots of different positions in football, players that fill specific roles and execute specific tasks. The one that you want to remember is called the quarterback. When a team is trying to score points, the one who's in charge of orchestrating that whole effort is the quarterback. Sometimes they throw the ball, sometimes they run the ball, sometimes they even catch the ball, but they're the field captain, the leader, the on-field presence that's actually making this whole thing go. If you don't have a quarterback, you don't have a good team. They're kind of like the seeker in Quidditch. And because of their central importance, a team's personality, or rather, the narrative that's crafted by the media surrounding a team is often determined by their quarterback. They're the project manager, the general, the bolt that holds the helicopter blades on, because if you don't have one, the entire operation falls to pieces. Anyway, over the last 30 years, The Packers have had 3 really good ones back to back to back. They had Brett Favre. He won a Super Bowl. They had Aaron Rodgers. He won a Super Bowl. And now they have Jordan Love, who has not won a Super Bowl, but he seems like he's very well capable of doing it. The team just never knows famine, and it's kind of bullshit. Now, in recent years, their championship bids have been repeatedly cut short by the Seahawks and 49ers, mostly the 49ers. But this year, they finally beat them, and sadly at that. Their current roster is full of young talent ready to prove themselves. Now, like any young and kind of inexperienced team, they may struggle with consistency, but they are very dangerous. Now, here's a fun thing about the Packers. Where most teams are owned by these big, marketing moguls and they're sponsored by massive corporations, the Packers are technically a non-profit. You can actually buy stock in the Green Bay Packers and own part of the Green Bay Packers. The Green Bay Packers are an NFL professional sports team that is owned by its fans, and I just think that's very, very, very cool. And another fun thing about them is that they, because it's Wisconsin, and they're the cheese Packers, all of their fans wear big old foam cheese on their heads. And I just think that that's really nice. Their last Super Bowl win was in 2010. So if I could come up with like a really nerdy reference to just sort of sum up them coming into this year, I'd say Star Trek Deep Space Nine, because it's the third in a line of very successful things, and it's changing the formula a bit, but it's still doing it in a very cool way. The Washington Commanders. Now, the team in our nation's capital enjoyed this first major run of success in the 1980s when they won 3 Super Bowls in 10 years behind their iconic fraternity of offensive linemen called the Hogs. Basically, in football, they're these big guys whose job it is to push other people around, and these guys were very big and very good at doing the pushing, and they were called the Hogs, and everyone wore pig noses at the games, and it was all very fun. After that, they've just kind of been there, never the most interesting, but by no means the least. In 1987, they beat the Dallas Cowboys with a team of scab players during a players' strike, a story which in part inspired the film The Replacements starring Keanu Reeves. That same year, Doug Williams became the first black quarterback to start and win a Super Bowl. And in the 2000s, they had a guy named Clinton Portis who used to take these interviews as various personalities and eccentric personas and characters. It was all very nice. Now, over their history, they've been a team built off of cast-offs and free agents, really. They're not very good at drafting their talent out of college. But this year, they've got this absolute savant of a rookie quarterback named Jaden Daniels, and he, when paired with Cliff Kingsbury, who's this really kind of eccentric offensive coach whose strategies failed in Arizona, but now the two of them together have sparked the most impressive turnaround of any team this year. So the Washington team used to be called the Redskins. Eventually, that racially charged name fell out of favor, and they spent 1 year as the Washington football team, because no one could make a decision, I guess. Being called the Washington football team was something that they got relentlessly clowned for. Personally, I didn't mind. I thought it sounded kind of cool, kind of like one of those European soccer teams whose whole name is the name of the city followed by football club, Barcelona Football Club, or whatever. But when it came down to the new name, I was really hoping they would go for something like the Warthogs or the Warhogs. I thought sounded pretty cool because I wanted them to reference back to that great O-line, the Hogs, remember? But eventually they went with the Washington Commanders, which is equally as militant, but is a lot less interesting. Now, part of the reason that it took them so long to ditch the Redskins moniker was for 24 years they were owned by a guy named Dan Snyder, who, by all accounts, is a sleazeball among sleazeballs. He did a lot of gross stuff. Like, he refused to renovate the stadium, and actual sewage started dripping onto the fans, and at one point this barricade collapsed and a bunch of people spilled out and got I don't actually remember if anyone got hurt, but it was bad. There was a tragic death of a player named Sean Taylor in the early 2000s, and over the years he would repeatedly just drag out these half-assed memorials to garner sympathy, pretty much standing on the guy's corpse. And it all just felt kind of gross. The thing that always stuck out to me the most was that apparently he kind of forced the team's cheerleaders to act as escorts for his buddies at certain events. And that is just yikes. That's like putting it lightly. That's the lightest. Yikes is about as light as I could ever put that. But eventually, he actually embezzled something, or I'm not quite I don't really remember exactly the details of it, but he did something with money that actually got the attention of the other owners in the NFL, and they pushed him out, kind of forcing him to sell the team. The new owner right now is a guy named Josh Harris. He owns the 76ers, which is a basketball team. I don't really care. As long as it's not Dan Snyder, I don't care to know anything about Josh Harris. I'm not happy with what I know about Dan Snyder. I didn't choose to know these things, but I do. But coming into the playoffs this year, the Washington Commanders have a new owner, a new name, a new coach, and a new QB. It's all new blood, and it's looking for success. Their last Super Bowl win was in 1991. And a good nerd reference for this would be the Fire Nation from Avatar: The Last Airbender, specifically at the end of the story, because it's got a proud history. I know we've been doing some cringy shit lately, but Prince Zuko is here now, and we're all going in the right direction. The Minnesota Vikings. Based in Minneapolis, Minnesota, this team cannot catch a break. They came up short in the 1960s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s. Basically, every decade there's a point at which it looked like this team was going to get over the hump and win a championship, but they never do. And they have had amazing players, big personalities, generational talents like Kevin Randall and Randy Moss, Adrian Peterson, Jared Allen. Oh my God. But all of this, and every single time, it's not like it just sort of slowly peters out. There's always this weird thing that happens. Like maybe it's a guy who never misses field goals, missing a field goal. It's like this dumb throwing across the body interception. But they never just peter out. There's always this moment when you can identify this is the moment when their fortunes turned on them. But they've had enough success over the years, even though they have never won a Super Bowl. They don't quite get that lovable losers moniker. It's more of a just drastically tortured fan base. I'm talking abused. Now, to sum it up, this team came into this year expecting it to be sort of a rebuilding year as they grew into their new rookie quarterback. But then that guy got injured, and his backup, Sam Darnold, took off in a sprint. He went from being a failed draft pick in New York to a failed backup in Carolina to a successful backup in San Francisco, and now he's turning in a borderline MVP type season in Minnesota. They've had some iconic quarterbacks in the past, but it's funny because they're never homegrown. They're always cast-offs from other organizations who find sort of surprise success here. But one thing they've always had is good wide receivers. They have a very deep history of wide receivers, and that hasn't changed because they currently have the best receiver in the league, Justin Jefferson. And together, Darnold having this career year and Jefferson having a career year, they won 14 games and only lost 3. Turns out the whole team is just pretty good, actually. I'm glossing over the defense and everything, but I'm trying not to get too detailed. But the whole team is pretty darn good. Now, will this be the year that they finally break through? Who knows? I don't know. But here's a fun fact for you. One time, they play in a dome, generally, and one time there was a snowstorm that was so severe they had this buildup of snow on the roof of their dome, and it punched through and spilled onto the field inside. Collapsed the whole dome, and it took ages to fix it. And another cool fact is before they actually had the good sense to play indoors, back when they were an outdoor team, they had this really good defensive unit that was, as a unit, named the Purple People Eaters. Isn't that great? Now, nerd reference for this team? Fucking Sisyphus, I guess? Okay, maybe not Sisyphus, but at least Tex from Red vs. Blue. Extremely talented, good at everything she does, doomed to fail at every single turn. The Los Angeles Rams. Now, the Rams are a team worthy of Hollywood, bearing the bright blue and gold of the SoCal coast, but they are also a team with a history of dramatics, alternating between dominance and doormats. Look, their first Super Bowl came in 1999 after the team moved to St. Louis. That's when Cinderella Man himself, Kurt Warner, went from stocking shelves at a Hy-Vee to the little-known Arena League and eventually became the ringmaster of an offense so explosive it was named the greatest show on turf. And then their second one came after they moved back to LA during the inaugural season of their brand new stadium in Inglewood. It was also the first season in LA for quarterback Matt Stafford, who was the greatest quarterback in the Detroit Lions franchise up until that point. Quick tangent about Matthew Stafford. If you are not a fan of football, Go watch a video called Matthew Stafford mic'd up shoulder injury or Matthew Stafford mic'd up injury. Just type that into YouTube. The video should come up. A guy comes up at the beginning and he's like, this is the longest shot in NFL films history. 4 minutes and 17 seconds. It is an incredible piece of life speed drama. And if that doesn't make you a fan of football, then nothing I say is gonna work. Wow. He put it together and won a championship, essentially validating his whole career as well as vindicating the daring front office moves they just sort of said, we're not bothering with rookies or draft class or anything, we're selling all of our future stock to acquire players now and go all in on this year. And that's not always the most advisable decision in sports, but it worked out for them. They won and that's it. End of story. They even won that Super Bowl on their home field because the Super Bowl was being played in that brand new stadium that year. It was almost as if it was scripted, and it very well might have been. See, this is all the gold gilded Hollywood story. The reality is a little bit more messy. After their move to St. Louis in 1995, the team was acquired by Stan Kroenke. Before that, it was owned by a woman named Georgia Frontiere, who in 1989 went down onto the field during a Monday night game and toasted the crowd with a glass of champagne, walked around the field and just toasted the crowd, and she was very fabulous. But anyway, in 1995, she moved the team to St. Louis, where the team was eventually acquired by Stan Kroenke in 2010, who wasted little time in bullying the city of St. Louis into building him a new stadium. Then, when they wouldn't, he packed up the team and shipped them back to Los Angeles in 2015. And there they spent several years in the dreadfully outdated LA Coliseum. And even after building SoFi and winning the Super Bowl in 2001, the hearts of the City of Angels still belong to the Dodgers, the baseball team, and the basketball Lakers. Even the Clippers have more rep than the Rams. And this has led to a sadly humorous phenomenon where Rams games often feel more like away games since most of the fans in the stadium are rooting for the other team. Angelinos just don't go to the games. It doesn't happen en masse. Now, I can't get into it here, mostly because I don't know as much, but there also is some stink surrounding Stan Kroenke. And yeah, he's sort of generally accepted as not being a great person. St. Louis, in particular, has never forgiven him, and nor should they. Now, if you want some fun facts about this team's history, most of it kind of surrounds their defensive line, interestingly enough. Now, they've had some great running backs, and I know that this probably means nothing to you, but on their defensive line, they had a guy named Deacon Jones, who was the man who invented the term sack, who he used to say, I think of it like I just take the entire offense and I put it into a bag and I take a bat and I beat on the bag. Now it's just a term for when you tackle a quarterback. But that's Deacon Jones invented that term sack. It's a sack. They got a sack. They sacked the quarterback. Another defensive lineman, Jack Youngblood, I believe in the 1970s, played a whole season on a broken leg, like actually a broken leg. Later in the 1990s, DeMarco Farr would pioneer techniques to help undersized defenders get around offensive linemen. And then Aaron Donald would take those teachings and become the most dominant defender in the league during the 2010s. Now this year, they're a team that has had to clamor their way back to prominence after mortgaging their entire future on that 2021 victory. Much of the cast is still the same. Let's see if they can win their third trophy and the hearts of their city. A good nerd reference for them might be Thanos, because what did it cost them to win? Everything. But hey, sorry bud, but the Avengers went and ran back the clock and now you gotta do it again. Are you inevitable? We'll find out. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers came into the league as a pack of creamsicle-clad losers. They had this bizarre pattern of drafting and then giving up on quarterbacks that would later go on to become Super Bowl winners. Doug Williams, who eventually won with the Redskins, as before mentioned, Steve Young, who eventually won with the 49ers, and Trent Dilfer, who eventually won with the Ravens. But speaking of eventually, Coach Tony Dungy arrived and crafted them into a defensive juggernaut. Again, defense stopping the other team from scoring. In 2002, when offensively minded John Gruden replaced him, they won their first Super Bowl. Ever since then, they've been a consistently good defensive team, with a handful of offensive stars. In 2020, they won a Super Bowl while being the retirement home for Tom Brady. Again, it was their defense that really set the tone. And now they've got this crazy guy named Baker Mayfield. Not classically great as a QB, but he plays with such passion, he can sometimes will his team to victory. And even though he's got a good supporting cast around him, including a future Hall of Famer Mike Evans, no one's really expecting the team to do much. 4 years removed from their last Super Bowl, and already they're underdogs. They can't get any respect. No respect at all. Further evidence of this lack of respect is that, to this point in writing the script, this is the shortest summation that I have done. So here, I'll throw in another fun fact. In football, it's common for players to give their teammates congratulatory little headbutts. And don't worry, it's fine. They're all wearing helmets. Baker Mayfield headbutts his teammates without a helmet. Like, as in, they're wearing one and he is not. It's wild. He just goes for it. He's crazy and stocky and strong, and he headbutts people. And he's short. The man is literally a dwarf from Lord of the Rings. And I guess that makes the rest of the Buccaneers the Dwarven Kingdom. So, there you go. The Philadelphia Eagles. Now, the city of brotherly love were in a similar boat to the Vikings for a long time. One of those teams that just could never get over the top. They were known for having hard-nosed fans, real chuff guys, and really dynamic offensive stars, and then violently punishing defenses. In 2017, they were poised to make another run at it when seemingly disaster struck. Their quarterback was injured just before the playoffs. And that is when Nick Foles stepped into the driver's seat and led the Eagles to one of the most unlikely and heroic championships in recent memory. It was true David versus Goliath kind of stuff. Over the next few years, the team would struggle and retool, getting those new faces into familiar roles. And now the face of the whole team is this guy named Jalen Hurts. Very cool, very athletic, sometimes does a goof. He did one of those goofs back in 2022, which in part lost them the Super Bowl against the Chiefs. The following year, they made the playoffs, but immediately imploded, and now they're back, better than ever, with the aid of Saquon Barkley, a ball carrier so dynamic, he literally jumped over a dude backwards this year. And we'll see if they can fight their way back to glory. Here's a fun thing, though. They had this really athletic quarterback in the 1980s named Randall Cunningham. He had a rocket arm and a habit of jumping over defenders in an attempt to score. And he was once asked, "Man, why do you think that you can fly?" To which he responded, "Because I'm an eagle." Back in the 80s, the coach decided to shake things up and hold open tryouts, meaning that anyone, any fan, anyone off the street could just come and try out for the team. And a whole bunch of people showed up, and it was a bit of a fiasco, but they actually ended up identifying one quality talent in all the bunch, and his name was Vince Papale, and he actually made the Eagles roster that year. He wasn't like a quarterback or a wide receiver, he was more of a special teams guy, one of those small role players that only sees the field occasionally, but is still really important. But it's just so cool that an actual fan was able to become an NFL player. Nerd reference time. We know they're really powerful. We know that they're super good at what they do, but are they gonna pull through? Are they gonna help us right now when we need them to? Fuck it. 2 Lord of the Rings references. The Philadelphia Eagles are the Eagles from Lord of the Rings. The Detroit Lions. Keeping this one short and sweet, the 2 teams with the longest sustained history of losing are the Cleveland Browns and the Detroit Lions. The Browns were so bad that they just stopped existing there for a bit. The Lions have been so bad that they drove 2 of the best players to ever play the game into early retirement, running back Barry Sanders and wide receiver Calvin Johnson, aka Megatron. This team was so bad, Megatron quit. Megatron quit! Now the skies brightened somewhat with the arrival of Matthew Stafford, but sometimes solid QB play isn't enough. Now again, Stafford would win a Super Bowl, but not until he was traded player for player to the Rams in exchange for their quarterback, Jared Goff. Now even though many thought this would be sort of a stopgap measure, actual Lion man Dan Campbell took the reins as head coach and instilled a winning culture second to none in the NFL. At first, everyone thought he was a bit hokey, talking about, oh wow, we're gonna be ankle biters, and then we're gonna go up and we're gonna get to the leg, and then we're gonna bite off a kneecap while we're at it. And they talking about how they were gonna claw their way from the bottom to the top. But hey, his players will run through a brick wall for that guy. And hey, this pack of kneecap biters, they've been trending up ever since. Last year, they came just short of the Super Bowl, and this year, they are the best team in the NFC. From endless fields of trash to rising like a phoenix. Man, Naruto. They're Naruto. Years of taking L's, now equally goofy as they are dangerous, rocketing to the top. They've got big protagonist energy. The Lions are Naruto this year. And I forgot a fun fact. Here's a cool, fun little fun fact about them. Barry Sanders, that very good running back mentioned earlier, was so elusive that opposing teams would prepare to play against him by chasing chickens. Because there wasn't a better way. There was no one who could emulate the way that Barry Sanders moved. And so they would just have the players try to chase chickens around to corner them and box them in, you know? And that was the best way that they could emulate someone as elusive as Barry Sanders. It's just very silly. The Denver Broncos. The Denver Broncos were one of those teams that you would call a tortured team or a tortured fan base in the 1980s because they kept losing Super Bowls. They would make it, and then they would get crushed by either the Redskins or the 49ers or the Giants. All of this losing fell on the shoulders of the same guy, quarterback John Elway. He's not only the best quarterback in their history, but also the current general manager. And you know, he wasn't even originally drafted by the Broncos. He was drafted by the other horse team in the NFL, the Colts, and then just said, nah, I don't want to do that, and eventually signed with the Broncos. But anyway, his playing career ended on a high note when they won the Super Bowl in 1996, and then after that opportunity to ride off into the sunset, John Elway comes back and they win the Super Bowl again the next year in 1997. So it was like the riding off into the sunset was put at risk, but hey, they won again, and so now it's like, okay, good. You know, now they can relax, and they did relax for some time, becoming pretty mediocre until they eventually started putting things together when they picked up quarterback Peyton Manning from the Indianapolis Colts. In 2015, Manning also won them Super Bowl and retired immediately after riding off into the sunset himself. So the Broncos have a history of their Super Bowl winning quarterbacks retiring afterwards. They also have always been a team that gets their players from unorthodox places. That they're sort of the team of misfits, the team of cast-offs. They've never really been a team that drafts a quarterback. Even, you know, their big quarterback that they so drafted, they didn't draft it. Remember, John Elway, he was drafted by the Colts and then said no and signed with the Broncos. So the Broncos never draft their quarterbacks. But here's the thing, this year they did. They drafted a quarterback named Bo Nix from Oregon, and he is actually pretty darn good. He's not outstanding, but he's got this great head coach with him, a guy who won a Super Bowl in New Orleans, Sean Payton. And so, you know, good schooling, good student, good defense, and the team is winning ball games. This year, they were the last team to make the playoffs and probably the biggest long shot to make the Super Bowl other than the Texans. A couple fun facts now. Broncos Stadium, I think it used to be called Mile High. It might still be called Mile High Stadium. Either way, it is at a significant altitude. So much so that opposing teams that aren't acclimated to that altitude need to have oxygen on the sidelines so that they can huff oxygen to stay, you know, functional during games. So the home field advantage is very real for the Broncos. Now, during that 1996 Super Bowl win, Terrell Davis, the running back, had the game of his life. However, Terrell Davis was also prone to having migraines that would get so bad that sometimes he couldn't see. And during this game, in the middle of his career-defining performance, he had one such migraine. He went over to the sideline and was like, hey, I can't see. They were about to score. And the coach was like, okay, we need you to play in the game because if you're not in it, we're going to fake it to you. Like, we're going to make it like we're going to use you as a decoy. But if it's not you as the decoy, then they're not going to believe the decoy. And so Terrell Davis went back into the game, stood on his spot, and ran blind into the scrum of people. They faked like they were giving him the ball, and then they went around and scored a touchdown. And I just think that that's one of the coolest stories, that even when he was blinded by a migraine, he still was able to help his team win. A nerd reference for them would be Rayleigh and Luffy from One Piece, harkening back to Sean Payton being an old coach who's already been there, and Bo Nix being that young gun who's trying to get there. The Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, the Pittsburgh Steelers have won more Super Bowls than any other team, except for the Patriots, who they are tied with 6 Super Bowls as a franchise. Their big run of dominance happened back in the 70s when they had the blonde bomber at QB, a couple of really good wide receivers, and a defense that was so infamous it was called the Steel Curtain. In the 2000s, they were able to string together 2 more Super Bowl wins in 2005 and 2008. They've come close a couple times since, but never really been able to break through. In recent years, they've become known for prima donna players and toxic personalities, but head coach Mike Tomlin, who's one of the longest tenured, I think he is the longest tenured head coach in the NFL right now, has managed to, through all of this, keep a very consistent winning formula. Recently, they drafted this local kid to play quarterback for them, and he didn't really pan out. So, they went out and acquired Russell Wilson, a quarterback who actually already won a Super Bowl with the Seahawks, but had just crashed out in Denver. So, no one was really expecting anything, but lo and behold, he's been able to do a good job, play good football, and the team has been winning games, and they're back here in the playoffs. And while they're not looking dangerous, they're just always a pretty darn good team, so you got to keep an eye out for them. A fun little anecdote is that they used to have a player who was so tenacious he was known as Mean Joe Green. And he sort of changed his persona in this commercial. I think it was a Coca-Cola commercial, where this kid gives him a Coca-Cola after a game as he's limping down the hallway. And then he turns around and he gives the kid his jersey and is like thanks, Mean Joe, because he's Mean Joe, but it's like this really warm and fuzzy commercial, and it's kind of altered his perception. You should look it up, it's cute. A good nerd reference for them would be Doctor Who, specifically the Peter Capaldi version, where this has been a long-running success, very successful program. And then this new guy's coming into it, and everyone's like, hey, maybe he's a little bit old for this. But actually, he's bringing depth, he's bringing talent, and he's bringing a lot of good moments to the character. Football team. The Los Angeles Chargers. It still feels weird to say the Los Angeles Chargers, because for many years they were the San Diego team. And they had a very strong support base in San Diego. But just like what happened in St. Louis, the owner packed up the team when the city wouldn't do what he wanted and moved them out to LA. So I guess all the crappy owners bring their teams to LA. Pity LA is not really a football town. It just ain't. But yeah, throughout their history, the Chargers have been like comic book heroes, wearing bright blue and yellow and white and bearing on their helmets an iconic bolt of lightning. From Dan Fouts and Kellen Winslow to Antonio Gates and Junior Seau and LaDainian Tomlinson and Drew Brees, they've always had these great, really charismatic and interesting to watch players. But then they came to Los Angeles, and now they're the second fiddle to the Rams, who are already pretty much the fifth fiddle to the city. And so over the years, they've tried a lot of things to get that charisma and fun back into the franchise, and it hasn't gone well for the most part. There's moments of greatness, but then they always really blow it in the end. And actually, that was a theme for them for a long time, even when they were back in San Diego, blowing playoff games. Marty Schottenheimer, one of the best coaches in the history of the NFL, could not win a playoff game to save his life, and that ended his career. But now they've got this guy, Jim Harbaugh, who has pretty much had success everywhere he's gone as a coach. He had success in Stanford, then he had success with the 49ers, then he went back to college and won a national championship for Michigan, and now he's here in Los Angeles with the Chargers. See, it's still weird for me to think Los Angeles Chargers. They just don't feel like they belong to Los Angeles. They feel like they belong to San Diego still. Anyway, Jim Harbaugh, sure enough, has put together a solid season with former rookie phenom quarterback Justin Herbert, who has since regressed and become a little bit more of a run-of-the-mill quarterback, but if anyone can revive his career, it's Jim Harbaugh. Good nerd reference for the Chargers would probably be Pulp Fiction's character Jules, because they've been spending a long time wondering if they're the tyranny of evil men and they are besought by the tyranny of evil men, but they're trying real hard right now to be the shepherd. So don't fuck that up. So let's see if they can pull through this year. The Baltimore Ravens. Now, the Baltimore Ravens have had a very proud history, and a short one at that, because they were the Baltimore Colts before that team picked up everything in the middle of the night and moved to Indianapolis. And then it took a few years for them to get a team back, and when they did, they named it after Edgar Allan Poe with the Baltimore Ravens. And honest to goodness, the Baltimore Ravens were nothing before Ray Lewis arrived. Ray Lewis was one of the most intense players to ever play the game. He was an inside linebacker. I know that means nothing to you guys, but his job was essentially to stop the other team from scoring at any costs. Whether it's through the pass or whether it's through the run, whether it's hitting people or intercepting the ball and going the other way with it, he would do it all. And he would shout and he would scream and he would dance this thing called the squirrel dance, even though it didn't look anything like a squirrel. And he was one of the most natural leaders that the NFL has ever had. You have no idea how much I want to show some clips of Ray Lewis in this, but I don't want to deal with NFL copyright stuff. I just want to talk about this because I have no other outlet. But basically, they won a Super Bowl in 2000, and then they came back and did it again in 2012 against the 49ers. And Ray Lewis rode off into the sunset. And ever since then, they've been able to keep up the defensive mindset. They've always been a strong defensive team. However, in the modern age, they have Lamar Jackson, who is probably one of the single most talented quarterbacks in all of the NFL. He's quick, he's fast, he's smooth, he's smart. And so far, he just hasn't gotten it done when it matters the most. But at this point, that's pretty much the story of everyone in the AFC. Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs have been so dominant over the last 5 years that all of those other great talents in the AFC, like Lamar Jackson for the Ravens, Josh Allen for the Bills, Joe Burrow for the Bengals, all of them have just kind of been waiting their turn because they can't get past the Chiefs. I mean, the Bengals did get past them at one point, but then they didn't win the Super Bowl. So, what doesn't count. So I would personify the Baltimore Ravens this year as kind of like Starscream from the Transformers. Very powerful, but not the most powerful, and constantly looking to usurp the one who is the most powerful, but never quite getting it done, and bumbling all the time when it matters the most. So here's hoping that they can bust through this year, because I just don't want the Chiefs to win another one. Funny story about Lamar Jackson. There was this one time when they were losing the game, and then Lamar Jackson went off the field with some kind of apparent injury, and everyone was wondering what he was doing, but then this footage came out of him running into the locker room and then running out after, getting something taped up or whatever you have to do to deal with injury. And once he was back on the field, suddenly he was playing amazing, zipping all over the place and snatching victory from the jaws of defeat. And that's when everyone looked back at that footage of him running into the locker room and realized that it looked an awful lot like someone who really needed to go number 2. So there's never been confirmed. It's never been confirmed. I think it was denied at one point, but it's a very funny little story. In 2012, when they won the Super Bowl, they called it the Har Bowl because the Ravens head coach at the time, and also the Ravens head coach now, is John Harbaugh. And remember the guy who's now the head coach for the Chargers? That's Jim Harbaugh. And he was the head coach for the 49ers in 2012. So these two brothers played each other in the Super Bowl. It was really nuts. The Houston Texans. The Houston Texans are the youngest team on this list. They did not exist before 2003. Well, there was a team in Houston, the Houston Oilers, but they eventually became the Tennessee Titans later on. The Houston Texans are something new, and hitherto this point, something that has been largely unsuccessful. I mean no disrespect, but I'm gonna sound like I do. They didn't really do anything really significant until J.J. Watt, the NFL's equivalent to the Hulk, came onto the team, and he was an amazing defensive presence. However, they just never had a complete team around him, and didn't win a lot of playoff games. I don't know if they won any, actually. They've been kind of circling the drain for a while now, but now they've got this new guy called C.J. Stroud, and he's really led a revival. Basically, the draft, I've been saying the draft a lot. If you don't know what the draft is basically a reenactment of when you're standing on the playfield as a kid and they're like picking teams for dodgeball or something. It's like that, only there's 32 teams, hundreds of people hoping to get picked, and only 262 opportunities to get picked. The Carolina Panthers had the first pick, and the Houston Texans had the second pick, and the two big quarterbacks that year were Bryce Young and C.J. Stroud. The Texans were pretty much just going to take whichever one the Panthers didn't, and the Panthers took Young. Young has since struggled. Stroud, who wound up on the Texans, has flourished, having one of the best rookie seasons in history, and then turning around and having an okay, but definitely not a sophomore slump, but still a serviceable season. The thing about the modern Texans is that they play in a very weak division, the AFC South. The Jacksonville Jaguars have imploded, the Tennessee Titans have imploded, and the Colts were the only real competition to them, and they got really injured. So I'm going to personify the Houston Texans coming into these playoffs as the Norwegian crown prince Fortinbras from Shakespeare's play Hamlet. Basically just showed up at the end, and everyone's either dead or dying, and he's like, well, I guess this is mine now. So, oh man, they're a young team. Don't have a lot of stories about them, and it kind of feels like they got into the playoffs by default. But that's the thing about football. On any given Sunday, some team can upset another. The Buffalo Bills. Okay, so apart from the Detroit Lions, the Buffalo Bills have the big protagonist energy in the league right now. They've got a storied history and one of the most rabid fan bases in the world. Their fan base is called the Bills Mafia, and they cover themselves in food and jump through tables, and they have these tailgate parties days before the games actually start in the freezing snows of upstate New York. So yeah, they are crazy fans. But that enthusiastic support is not what gives them their big protagonist energy. No, we're talking about a tragic backstory. See, a little bit of tea here, but remember O.J. Simpson and the whole yeah, he played for the Buffalo Bills. That was his professional team, so there's that, which has to leave a little bit of a scar. And then in the 1990s, the Buffalo Bills went through something that no other team has ever gone through. Not only did they lose the Super Bowl, they lost 4 straight Super Bowls. Me, a 49er fan, I'm pissed off that I've had to live through my 49ers blowing 3 of them in my lifetime. I couldn't imagine what would be going through my brain if I'd watched them blow 4 straight, back to back to back to back. Oh my God. And if that wasn't tragic enough, do you remember about a year ago, or maybe a year and a half, I can't really remember how long ago it was, but there was this whole thing about a player who died on the field. That player was Damar Hamlin, and no, he didn't actually die, but he got hit in such a way that his heart, he went into cardiac arrest, and it was very dramatic, and they had to postpone the game. It sort of colored the way that the playoffs shaped up that year, but that player, Damar Hamlin, was on the Bills, and he's still playing. He's still playing. Football players are crazy. Some weird dad lore for this team would be that back in the 1990s, when they were losing those Super Bowls, they had this offense run by a guy named Joe Kelly, and the offense was called the K-Gun offense because he was Kelly and he was throwing the ball. It's the K-Gun. But anyway, he was injured at the time, and the backup, Frank Reich, led the greatest comeback in NFL history. I don't remember the exact numbers. I think it was like 35-3, and then they came back to win like 40-something, or maybe it was 38-35. I don't know. But it was crazy. And now their team is pretty much defined by their superstar quarterback, Josh Allen, a guy who was initially underestimated coming out of college because they thought that he was, even though he was very big and athletic, he wasn't very technically sound as a quarterback, but he's refined his play and is pretty much the closest thing that the league has to Superman. Like, he is a guy who can single-handedly will his team to victory by just like jumping over people and pushing people over and being a 6'5" monster of a human being with a football. He is often referred to as Superman, and when he really takes the team on his back, they call it kind of like he's doing hero ball right now. And so the Buffalo Bills are Batman. Tragic backstory, friends with Superman, deals with the mafia. The Buffalo Bills are Batman, and they are one of the big protagonist teams coming into these playoffs. The Kansas City Chiefs. Now, what good is any story without a good villain? And the villain is definitely the Kansas City Chiefs for so many reasons. Now, the Chiefs are actually a very storied franchise. They lost the first Super Bowl ever played against the Green Bay Packers, and eventually they won the fourth Super Bowl ever played against the Vikings. But then they did nothing for the 70s and the 80s, and they started clambering their way back in the 90s when they kind of became a retirement home for Joe Montana and also Marcus Allen. They've had plenty of superstars through the years. But no one was ever really putting together a full, complete team until Andy Reid came along and paired with quarterback Patrick Mahomes, who I'm sure you know because he's in every single goddamn commercial on the planet right now. They are winning lots of Super Bowls right now. Patrick Mahomes' favorite target is Travis Kelce, who you might know because Travis Kelce is Taylor Swift's personal person. He's Taylor Swift's boyfriend, and there's this whole thing about how the NFL has been pushing that narrative so much because they're trying to attract Swifties into the NFL fandom. It's a... oh, man. Anyway, they won the Super Bowl in 2019 against my 49ers, and then they got back to the Super Bowl and lost in 2020. And then they didn't get there in 2021, but then they got back and they won against the Eagles in 2022. And then they went back and they won in 2023 against my 49ers again. I hate them so much. Oh my God. Oh God, it's a dumb game. I shouldn't care about this as much as I do, but I just really have vitriol in my heart for these people. They've hurt me. If there was any reason to root for the Chiefs at all, it's because they are trying to become the first team in NFL history to three-peat, win 3 Super Bowls in a row. And you know what? I've got to quote Brendan Perna on this. If you're rooting for them for that reason, you are a bad person. Walter White. The nerd reference for the Chiefs are Walter White because they can't keep getting away with it. Okay, well, that was a nice thing for me, so I finally got a chance to talk about sports, and that's nice. I hope that you took this and either grabbed a favorite team, just liked listening to me yap, or now you have a little bit more knowledge so you can talk to your friends around the water cooler and share all these crazy stories with them. Anyway, that's all I've got. Thanks for listening to me rant. Thanks for giving me an outlet for all of my useless sports knowledge. I'll be back next time with an episode of the Skyrim audio adventure. Toodaloo.